had some pretty good cases. I had the Cassidy Center death. I don't know if you recall that one.
No, I'm a transplant to St. Louis, and so which is probably good for our listeners because you can tell me and I'll kind of back you up if I don't understand the St. Louis geography or history.
Okay, back in '93, there was a girl that was abducted and murdered, and she was found in bush wildlife, and her name was Angie Hausman. About a week later, another little girl was abducted in Hazelwood, Cassidy Center, and her body was found a couple weeks later in the city, murdered also. So at that time in '93, when I was in homicide, everybody started thinking we have a serial child killer because we have two little girls dead within a month. And everybody was pretty scared back then. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners from the St. Louis area, older ones, probably remember this. My group was part of that investigation, and my daughter, for some reason, always likes to hear about how it was solved. And it was solved by forensics. I mean, it's really what solved this case. And the way the case went down is pretty much the little girl had a lanyard on her wrist, which was an alarm. And somebody found the alarm in the street going off, and she was gone. So they thought she got pulled into a car.
Now, why would she have been wearing a lanyard with an alarm?
I'm not really sure why the mom got it. I think the mom may have got it because of the first murder.
Was this around the time when children were showing up on milk cartons and you're...
I don't really recall that too much about the milk cartons, but I'm not sure why the mom gave her a lanyard. But it was basically a pin and an alarm, and if the pin got pulled out, the alarm went off.
Okay.
And the alarm was found in the street, and ultimately, when she was found in the city, she was wrapped up in a blanket. One thing that you do in homicide is you have debriefings every day. You got to know what everybody's found out the night before, the day before. You got to know what evidence that the lab has processed. And so every day we'd have a debriefing. The FBI was involved. And it kind of shows you how forensics really makes your case, is the FBI originally had a profiler, and they were saying that it was probably a white male, and he probably did both murders. So when you're told that, you start thinking that. You're thinking, okay, let's look for white guys. Let's look for this, let's for that. Well, the forensics... and I'll give you some of the clues, and we'll see if you can find out what it was, since you weren't from St. Louis. On the blanket, when they did the blanket, there was aluminum shavings, and there were paint chips, some white, some orange, on the blanket. So that's one of your clues. So what are you looking for?
Paint chips on the blanket. I have no idea.
So we started looking at maybe a machine shop. Okay.
Okay.
All righty. And then they told us that they had tire tracks of dually tires. You know what dualies are?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that
well,
was
for anybody that doesn't, it's two sets of tires on each side, typically in the back.
Correct. So they had dually tire prints on the lot where the body was found. So, and when I say this, I'm not saying I was the only one. Everybody had a part. Me and my partner went to the U-Haul in the neighborhood. Now, what is U-Haul?
Oh, big trucks. Yeah.
What color?
I guess red or like an orange.
Orange and white.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
Orange and
Yeah,
white.
yeah.
And the floors are made out of aluminum.
And they always have chipped paint coming out of them.
So we went to the local U-Haul, and we asked them, hey, give us a list of everybody that may have rented the trucks.
No way.
Between 2 days before the murder and a couple of days after the murder. And one person showed up in the neighborhood who lived in the house right where the lanyard was found on the street. So now that was my part right then and there. Another investigator got a call from a lady the same day that lived across the street. And she says, nothing for nothing. I know you guys have been around the neighborhood for a couple weeks now, but the neighbor across the street had a U-Haul truck and he backed into my mailbox. Can you guys do something about him damaging my mailbox? And that's when it all started coming together. They checked the tire prints. The tires matched the one at the scene. And they did some more forensic on the blanket, and they found a Afro-American pubic hair, and that threw the whole FBI
profiler thing
out.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a guy named Thomas Brooks. He confessed to the murder, and they drug her in the house and beat her, tried to rape her, and they left the body in there for about a week. and it started to smell, and he decided he had to get the body out of there, and he rented a U-Haul and took it down to the city where he used to live and dumped the body in a vacant lot. And that's how the crime was solved. Yeah. So a lot of your listeners might remember that crime.
So when you decide it's him, you have the evidence. Were you then on the case to go arrest him, or you?
No, like I said, well, your partner's of two, and my job that day after we figured out was him, because he originally had an alibi. He worked at a McDonald's, and they checked his alibi, and it showed he clocked in. Well, somebody else clocked him in. They later found out when it all started coming out, because he was spoken to the day of the murder because the lanyard was found in front of the house. And a footnote of some of this stuff is his sister and the lady in the house knew he did this, and the body was in there, and they were also charged with some crimes. And he pretty much confessed to the whole thing. He ultimately died in prison of AIDS. So,
good Lord,
that's the end of that story.
Thanks for watching this podcast short. You can find the rest of the interview on my channel. If you like this video, I hope you'll hit the like button and consider subscribing. I release a new interview with an interesting person every Wednesday morning.